.org/Civic Center or at 505-599-1148. KSJE is supported by San Juan Regional Medical Center, which is officially baby-friendly. This evidence-based initiative is designed to support mother-baby bonding and optimal infant feeding practices by upholding the 10 steps to successful breastfeeding. San Juan Regional Medical Center, officially baby-friendly, and serving the Four Corners since 1910. Find out more online at sanjuanregional.com.
Minutes past 8 o'clock, Thursday morning, March the 5th. Good morning, everybody. I'm Scott Micklin, and thanks for tuning in to KSJE 90.9 FM over the air in San Juan County, 103.3 FM over the air in Durango, Colorado, and of course you can listen anywhere. Just go to our website, KSJE.com. Welcome also to our viewers who are joining us live this morning from the KSJE Facebook page or maybe watching live on the KSJE YouTube channel. We're glad that you're with us as well. Coming up this morning, in the next few moments, archaeologist Paul Reed is my guest from Archaeologist Southwest and Salmon Ruins. We're talking about the recent BLM decision about the protections around Chaco Canyon. That and more coming up in the next few moments right here on KSJE, so stay right there. Later on this hour, we'll check in with Wally D Sports for the prep sports update. The brackets are out for the basketball teams. Girls and boys, of course, we'll check in on those and much more. Coming up this morning at 8:50 a.m. on KSJE. Mick Hess will be here at 9, roving with the arts, with some classical music, of course, and some more arts news for us, so don't forget about that. In addition to joining us on Facebook and YouTube, you can also follow KSJE on Twitter and check us out on Instagram as well. Weather forecast, it's going to be a pretty nice day here for the next couple of days at least. 62 and sunshine today in Farmington. Clear and 35 overnight. It'll be mostly sunny tomorrow with a high of 65 on Friday. Clear and 35 on the Friday night, and then partly sunny skies on Saturday with a high of 66. Maybe some rain showers in the forecast for Saturday night on into Sunday with a high of 57 on Sunday. Back to sunshine on Monday with a high of 62 degrees. And we always tell you that visual radio could take you places. We'll take you to the Taos Plaza this morning, where it's bright and sunny, and the temperature is a lovely 30 degrees in Taos this morning, on their way to a high of 56, and an overnight low of 26 degrees in Taos this morning. And that means something to our guest who's here. Paul Reed is here. Good morning. Welcome back to KSJE.
Good morning, Scott. Glad to be back with you here in person. 2 months in a row. We got a streak going.
I know. It's great to have you here. That's true. But you spend a lot of time at the Taos. Maybe not in the Taos Plaza, but in the Taos area for sure, right?
I do. And the plaza is lovely.
It is. It looks great today. Nice sunny, so the sun is coming up. But you are here to talk about a recent development in the protections of Chaco Canyon, which I know you and I have talked about. Right. And again, to be clear to our listeners and viewers, the actual ruins and Chaco Canyon itself is never really threatened, that is protected. Right. We are talking about the areas just outside the borders around the park that people have probably gone to and visited. And this has been the subject of a lot of debate and a lot of discussion about trying to get a protection zone, a buffer zone, if you will, within a certain radius of the park. And it's been anywhere from 10 miles now to less.
Right.
And the BLM came out just recently, last week?
Yeah, they released their long-range planning document in draft form. So this is an environmental impact statement, and it's an amendment to their resource management plan. So something that they've been working on for 6 years. And
in government speak, this is kind of what government agencies do that kind of drives some of their decisions over the next few years. Is that kind of why this is such an important decision?
Exactly. So these resource management plans, or RMPs as we call them, these are the planning documents for BLM lands. And, we have however many, 250 some million BLM acres in the West. So these documents are quite important. There's something like 15 of these now in the West that are making their way through the process. So, a lot of groups want to weigh in. We have environmental concerns, we have industry concerns, timber, range, all these things matter to folks. And, for the work that we do, of course, tribal concerns are paramount. So we have had the all Pueblo Council of Governors, individual Pueblos, the Navajo Nation engaged. So lots of different parties and a lot of things to talk about.
And that was relatively unique, I think, of bringing all these folks to the table to talk about this this idea of protecting the greater Chaco area, right?
Right. And, and that's some credit to BLM and the Bureau of Indian Affairs with their Navajo Regional Office on this, that they've been engaging groups. And they're required to by law, but it's highly variable across the West with different BLM offices, Forest Service offices, and the like. So this has been a long period of time that we've been engaging on this, and, a couple of false starts along the way. But they finally released these documents. Just, if anyone wants some light reading, we can direct folks to the e-planning page for BLM Farmington. If you search that out, it's easy to pop up. There's 4 documents, a main one, and then some appendices. And I think only about 800 or so pages of light reading.
Well, there you go. And get it done before lunch. There you go, maybe. So
and some of it's background, of course.
Sure.
The meat of it is probably a couple hundred pages.
Okay.
That's what us and our, different parties are focusing on.
Right. And so what came out of this is a smaller buffer than what you had been hoping and others around the park, and that's what's got folks concerned.
Right.
There was some legislation, in fact, still before Congress, is it not, for a 10-mile buffer, right?
Right, and that's something that us and a lot of folks, our senators, Heinrich and Udall, have championed that. Ben Ray Lujan in the House has championed this. So we had a bill passed last year through the full the full U.S. House that basically put a 10-mile buffer in place, a cultural protection zone with only excluding, though, the federal surface lands, and that's important, and we can circle back to that, Scott, as we go through it. So it would remove about 300,000 acres in 10-mile zones around the park and still have more than 1 million acres of land potentially available for different types of development. So that's an important point. This bill went to the Senate and has had a couple of hearings, but at this point it doesn't look to be moving forward. So that was one avenue. The BLM management plan amendment, as they term it, is another possibility for protecting that. And the way that the government works is they put out several alternatives in these plans. So they've identified 4 main alternatives and then what they call a no action, which basically means things stay exactly the same. That alternative is rarely taken during these processes. And then there's some sub-alternatives that connect to these. And one of their alternatives does say we're going to protect Chaco Culture National Historic Park and the area around it. And of course, as you said, the park's already protected. And that alternative identifies a 10-mile zone where the federal surface lands, the BLM managed lands, would not be leased. The thing is, though, they identify a preferred alternative. That's part of the process as well.
Sure.
And the ones that provide the protection that we were hoping for, that our Pueblo friends, our Navajo Nation friends and colleagues were hoping for, was not identified as the preferred one. The preferred one actually has a much smaller zone of about 4 miles without surface occupancy and development within that. And so we're concerned about that. The other issue with that 4-mile zone is there's very little BLM surface land actually within that. It's a very small percentage. Most of those lands, there is some state lands, which our land commissioner has already removed from active oil and gas leasing. There's some Navajo Nation Tribal Trust, and most of it are individual Navajo allotments, which go through a different course if people, want to try and lease those lands for different reasons.
Right. Let me show, for our viewers who are watching this morning, a story out of the 75 New Mexican about this very issue, right? This is maybe from just last week. It looks like February 28th. But it shows a great map, I think, that kind of also shows a little bit about what the problem is. And it's not anyone's fault, but it's just the way we call it the checkerboard area, and you can clearly see on this map just why it is called the checkerboard area, because there are so many different colors of maps. And so on this one, Chaco Canyon is kind of the purple area at the very kind of bottom of the map, and then if you look at the areas around it, you've got all different colors of different types of land and who's got jurisdiction over that land, and that's part of the, I guess, issues whenever you talk about Chaco protection that you have to deal with, right? These various entities that all have a say over what happens on those lands.
Right. It's made it very complicated, really, for anyone wanting to sort of sort out, what might be the best management approach to this. Even with the diverse interests we have in the country, it can be difficult on sort of solid, continuous blocks of federal land or state land or tribal lands. And of course, the tribes have the right to manage their own lands as they see fit. This area, though, is off the Navajo Nation reservation boundary. So we're in the checkerboard area, which was once part of the reservation and then went through some political transformations through time. And at this point, it's still majority Navajo Nation land, either allotment land or tribal trust land, but it's off reservation. So the rules for managing it are very different. And we have a high percentage of state land, relatively high, 5-6% in this area.
Right.
And then we have the BLM surface, which is about 19 or 20%. So that is what the federal legislation was focusing on, is to say we're just going to remove, again, these 300,000 or so acres of land from active drilling and leasing, which of course would leave the other million plus available in some form. So that's what's kind of interesting about going with this smaller protective zone, because in that 10-mile zone, and the way the legislation was written, the non-federal lands were not going to be affected in any way, shape, or form. But unfortunately, the rumor spread that this bill was going to exclude all development in around 10 miles, within 10 miles of Chaco, which is just not true. That is not the way the legislation is written. If it passed and was signed into law, people would still be free to manage their own individual lands the way they want. The state's free to manage it, the tribe is, individual allotment holders, other private owners. So, again, sometimes misinformation gets out as we talk about these things. And unfortunately, I think for this issue, there's been a lot of misinformation that's made its way out into the public's, view.
Right. And that was some of the things that maybe we had heard in this area, that folks maybe that live in that area, and it's a very rural area for sure, that maybe some of these Native American families maybe get some benefits from having oil and gas developments on their allottee lands or things like that, because there's no really land ownership necessarily in many of these areas, right?
Well, with the allotments, they're about as close as we get to private ownership. There's a little bit of Bureau of Indian Affairs oversight.
Right.
But the Navajo Nation really doesn't have a real active role in how individual allottees manage those lands.
So they would get some financial benefit if there
Right.
were some development on their
And
property, if you will.
Exactly, and that has in fact happened in a number of cases where oil companies have come to terms with private allottee holders, and they've done some development. So the real important point on that is that the federal bill as proposed would not impact those private land rights at all. The other rumor was that people wouldn't be able to get water through Indian Health Service, IHS, or they wouldn't get power through NTUA or Hamas Electric. Also not true. So people would still have the same rights to access their lands and pretty much do what they've been doing for decades.
Right.
So the protection would extend only to the federal lands. And those of us working on it felt like that was a good compromise to protect some of those.
So recently, late last year, I think it was, the Navajo Nation Council passed a bill, and that didn't help the cause, I guess, of trying to get this 10-mile buffer, right? Their
Right.
bill was against that.
Yeah, it was in their committee, so I'm not sure it's gone through the full Navajo Nation Council, and we're not real certain where that sits right now. But they were voting again on the basis of having been told that this 10-mile area would restrict all development. And the resolution that was written that way, and it really doesn't reflect what was on the federal side of it. So I do feel like there's an unfortunate misunderstanding there, and just not enough information flow maybe, between the parties to understand what that would do. So that was making it more difficult to promote the idea of a 10-mile bill, because people were saying, no, this is going to restrict private landowners' rights, this is a tribal sovereignty issue, and ultimately it affects, again, only the federal lands. So,
Right.
All we can do is sort of try to talk around that and say, here, this is actually what the bill would do, here's what it won't do, and try to move on from there, I guess.
Right. And so, as you said, this has been a long time coming, I think, and trying to get all these different entities at the table to maybe try to speak with a unified voice, which is very difficult in this
Right.
situation. And so to
It
get
is.
other entities that are maybe saying, well, we think it should be a smaller zone, and we think it should be a larger zone, or that doesn't provide that unified consensus, I suppose.
Right, and I think that had a pretty telling effect in a way on the plan that BLM and BIA ultimately put forward. They went from 5 to 4 even as a preferred alternative. Now, we should say, of course, that this is a process, so our government doesn't do things super rapidly, as we well know. From the standpoint of citizens, though, all private citizens can engage. A number of groups have signed on as parties that want to be part of this, and with the plan and the documents coming out on the 28th of February, folks have until May 28th, so a 90-day period of comment. And it's real easy to comment. You go to the website, the BLM e-planning website, and click on I want to comment, and you can write comments right in there and say, this is what I support, this is what I don't like, whatever. So that's, that gives us a chance as citizens, and again, as concerned groups, to weigh in. What will happen then is BLM will compile those comments in June, July, and August, go through them, and they will head towards a final decision, they're saying by November or December. It's potential that it could get past that point, but more than likely by the end of the calendar year, they will come out with what they call a record of decision, which is this action was proposed, comments were taken, and this is the alternative, and this is the plan that we're proposing. And then at that point, it'll become policy.
I see. So there's still some steps to get to that point.
There are some steps to get to that point, more things to talk about. But generally speaking, when an agency identifies a preferred alternative, I don't know of very many cases where they've come back and gone to alternative B or C or whatever down the list. It's certainly in the realm of possibility. But I think with the time the agency put in on this, both agencies, BIA and BLM, that more than likely that's what they're ultimately going to want to do. So
sure. Interesting. And, of course, the BLM, I imagine, I haven't had anyone from the BLM on this program in a long time. There's been some staff changes in the Farmington office. But they would say that it's their job, it's their charter to manage and kind of try to manage all the uses of this public land for both industry and development and protection and open space and all these different things. And I guess, to be playing devil's advocate, that would be what their message is that we have to try to provide some balance to this land around this great historic monument, historic landscape.
Right, exactly. They have a multi-use policy, and that's, we well understand that in New Mexico and across the West. So, yeah, and I think they would tell you that they've probably found what they consider to be a good balance. We feel with the landscape already 91% leased that they could probably do more and still allow the oil and gas. So, so that's where we differ. And yeah, I would encourage you, Scott, I'll get you some information off air about the new BLM manager, and I met him at a recent meeting, and I think that he might be willing to come on and talk. And we don't necessarily have to do a now retired Chris Matthews point counterpoint type
we won't
encounter,
do that necessarily, but but it would be good to get their point of view too about this important topic. It certainly is.
And it's going to affect policy in this area for 15 years. They say that these plans and amendments have a 10 to 15 to 20 year use life. So that's going to take us well into the future.
And I know that you and I have talked in the past, though, that when maybe parcels of land near the park have come up for maybe oil and gas development, that the BLM has maybe pulled those from consideration. And so that is, I guess, kind of what you hope they would do all the time, but it kind of lets that possibility slip through every once in a while that maybe, since it's not wrong to do that, something could get through, I guess, at some point.
Right, that's right. And there has been a little bit of back and forth. One of the ways that was explained to me fairly recently by the BLM was that if companies nominate parcels, that they're required to go through an evaluation. So, and sometimes knowing full well that they can't lease within the boundaries of Chaco, even some of those parcels potentially make it to BLM, and then they're like, well, this is Chaco Canyon, this is in a wilderness area, there are different reasons why there's no leasing here. So I think they partly consider that just sort of a fair use type issue, that people can propose parcels and that then they'll exclude them. But, to some of us on this side, it seems a little odd that you would even go through any kind of process of, well, you can't lease there because we have this policy in place. And we're still under an order that Secretary Bernhardt and the Interior Department put in place in June. So we still won't have any leasing before then. And it's unlikely with what's going on that they would propose new leases in the Farmington field office that would get inside this 10-mile zone that we've been trying to protect. But as we get into the new calendar year and leases that would be about a year from now, March 2021, if this plan gets approved, it goes forward, then we may well have leases again. And I imagine people will again say, hey, you're getting too close to Chaco. So, we had hoped for something either with the BLM plan or on the legislative side that would provide just more protection for this area. How many Chaco canyons do we have in the world? How many do we have in New Mexico? We've got a lot of important special places, and sometimes groups and folks are reluctant to say this is more important than this, but Chaco is a World Heritage Site, and this is an area that's deserving of protection. And I think we can afford as a society, the society that we have, to create a zone of protection around Chaco and still have the oil and gas development, where it's possible and where it works.
Sure. Well, it's an ongoing conversation for sure, and as we said, it's very complicated. There's so many different entities that have jurisdiction over some of these lands, and even a BLM decision doesn't affect 100% of the land around the park.
No, it won't. It's the BLM plan applies to the 19% that's in that zone. BIA is also working on their own documents, but they don't do resource management plans. They have slightly different legislation that they're responding to in their policy. But they have generally agreed to cooperate on these larger environmental issues and the cultural issues, and basically be in compliance with each other and policy. And we support that, because otherwise we would have potentially just another set of, potentially confusing regulations and protections in place.
Right.
To try and deal with. So this at least makes the complicated checkerboard area perhaps a little less complicated. Perhaps.
Perhaps. That's the key word of that sentence. I think you're absolutely right. And so again, we have this kind of stalled legislation both maybe in U.S. Congress and at the Navajo Nation Tribal Council. And so
right.
if they both die and go away, I guess that's one thing. If they move forward, or if we wait till after the elections, perhaps it'll be a different strategy. I don't know.
Well, right. It's uncertain. Folks are really uncertain about the Senate bill at this point, because I don't think that there were the votes in the Senate, even to clear one of the committees that it was in. So I think we'll just have to see how the political winds blow and how things happen later in the year, and then we get into 2021 and kind of see where these things lie. And then, so we're engaging at this level of this resource management plan and with sort of top-level legislation. The more day-to-day thing is once they start issuing leases again, when we've got to think about that and see about how to manage that. So the nice thing is that's also a process that we're involved in. The All Public Council of Governors is involved, Navajo Nation has reps, and others are talking to BLM about how that leasing would proceed in light of what's likely with this plan. So there's kind of these multiple levels that we're continuing to work on, and just trying to protect areas that are important and heritage areas, because again, we live in a state that has an incredibly rich cultural heritage with a whole lot of different groups, over thousands of years of time. And we are trying to continue as a modern industrialized nation, meet our energy needs. But, we've always felt, and our partners have, that there's a way to chart a path through these somewhat difficult, murky waters and end up where probably nobody's 100% happy, but we've protected strong cultural values and we're still getting the energy and the oil and gas development that we need.
Right.
So we call it responsible development. And
sure.
I think most of the oil companies out there want to do that as well. So, despite some of the discussion and the acrimony that comes up, I think, people can talk about things reasonably.
Right.
Even in 2020, Scott.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear you say that. I think that's important. And I guess some might say, well, maybe that's where we are. Not everyone's happy. You had a 10-mile that would have made you happy. They proposed a 4-mile, and so you're not happy, and maybe oil and gas folks aren't happy, but that's what we have. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's fair to say that if we
not happy.
We go forward with the 4-mile, we're not going to feel like we've got adequate protections in place. Right. And again, we're not talking about that many acres of land, ultimately. The other thing is, as the companies are looking to develop the Mancos Shale further, the zone right around Chaco is not good prime Mancos Shale development. It's in other areas further away from Chaco. So that's partly why, at least me personally, and I'm not sure I speak for all our partners, have felt like, the Chaco protection zone makes sense archaeologically, culturally, and probably from an industry standpoint. Those aren't the best lands to develop this resource and find the oil. it's areas further north and east by and large.
Right. And I would think that any good business is not going to want to invest millions of dollars in a well that's not going to produce. They'd rather do it somewhere else where it will produce.
Not where they have, at this point, several hundred wells that are in the area, and they know where they're encountering that resource. And, the seismic data that they get in the, in the earlier phases of exploring is pretty good for saying, here's where the resource seems to exist. It's not as good over here. It's going to cost twice as much here versus here. So I think there really is some, hate to use the word common sense, but that's the way it strikes me, alternatives and just compromise that can still be achieved on this. So, we kind of have to get the plan from the BLM and the BIA, and then, try and have some input. But whatever the plan is, move forward. And then, like I said, then we kind of go to the leasing stage and see how that process might work better for protecting areas that groups are concerned about. The thing is, 10 years ago, Scott, we weren't even doing this really. We were doing archaeological work to protect archaeological sites, but we really hadn't engaged very well with Native American descendant communities. And now with the work that we've done with the Pueblo of Acoma, we have a project with the Pueblo Zuni, groups like Santa Clara, Santa Ana, Tesuque, certainly the Hopis, the Navajo Nation. A lot of groups have engaged and said there are important places on this landscape that the archaeologists are not seeing. And as an archaeologist doing this for 30 plus years, I acknowledge this. I focus on physical known things, archaeological sites, artifacts, old buildings, pueblos, things like that. The folks on the other side are looking for different connections on the land. They're looking for areas where they might have connections between pinnacles. They might have other areas that are important to them, and those are things that are private a lot of times and confidential, and so we're not going to be able to see those. But if we can get enough information, then there are ways to exclude those from some leasing and protect them. So, and that's really where we're at. And again, this is a development just over the last 5 to 10 years that we're really trying to do this kind of management of landscapes, and we call them cultural landscapes. And when they're tribes, indigenous cultural landscapes is the term. And we're really trying to do more and more of this to better understand how to protect some of these areas, and not just say, well, here's an archaeological site, we drew a circle around it, we avoided it, we put a fence around it, and now it's okay. Well, for the tribes, they don't necessarily want it fenced if it's an archaeological resource, a cultural resource of theirs, and it might connect to another place that's now on the other side of this oil and gas facility, and that connection for them has been severed. So, those are the kinds of things we're at least trying to manage better.
Sure. And the new part of this conversation, I think, is that the tribes now maybe have a louder voice.
They do.
And a seat at the table to make their wishes known to you, to the government, to all these entities, right? As we move forward, which maybe 30 years ago was not happening.
Definitely wasn't happening. Not even really much beyond 10 years ago. There was some consultation happening, but the idea is to get these concerns into this resource management plan amendment, and then when we get to how the leasing goes, have the tribal views represented in some of those regulations as well, and really give them an opportunity to protect lands that are very important.
Right.
And and again, I don't think those are out of step with most Americans' values and what people really are concerned about. It's again this notion of balance. Here's where we can develop responsibly and not impact resources. Here's where we have either cultural or natural resources that suggest really, require a different approach for protection.
Right. And so in the minutes we have remaining this morning, Paul, read just a couple. The timeline again, this open comment period now on this BLM proposal is open for the next how many days?
90 days. Well, it's less than 90 now, so we're into the 90 days, but it ends on May 28th. And folks would need to go to the BLM e-planning website, real easy to find with a Google search. Click on it, they can download documents or read them on the website there, and then decide that, this is something that I have interest or concern about, so I'm going to put in some comments. And BLM will compile all those comments, and typically what they do, they tend to get fairly overwhelming response. They'll compile the comments, make those available publicly, and then continue the process, have a couple other meetings. They're supposed to have 2 public meetings in the next now less than 90 days, so we're supposed to hear on those by the end of this week or next week.
Okay.
So, and I'm glad to get that information to you, Scott, and some kind of little blurb that can go out in whatever way works. And we'll, of course, do it through our Facebook, Archaeology Southwest.
Very good. Well, let us know. And again, it can be any comment, pro, con, whatever you want to make about this plan. and be informed, because it is an important conversation that we're having. And as I've said, this document will guide some of these BLM decisions for the next decade or so.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Yeah, this is a long-range plan, so if folks have concerns about wildlife, about vegetation, about cultural resources, tribal access and rights, then this is the time to speak up and make yourself known. We do live in a country that gives us that right. We vote, and then we can have input on public policy. So,
Or we could argue on Facebook.
Well, that's always fun too. Although it's hard to know where those go ultimately, right?
Well, but these comments may actually go somewhere, I guess is my point, right?
Somebody will read them.
Yes.
And, and they'll get into the system, and, and if there's enough comments saying something, then, I think our agencies will at least pay some attention to those. And, influencing policy is a different issue, but, you make yourself heard. That's the best you can do.
Right.
So,
well, and it's documented too, as you said, and it will be part of the final, I think, record of this decision.
It will.
When it is finally made.
It will.
So all those comments that are compiled, so that's important to know.
Comments big and small.
That's right.
Be a citizen, have your rights, speak up.
There you are.
So.
Very good. Paul, thanks so much. It's always great to talk to you about
Scott,
this important topic and many others, so thanks.
I appreciate you giving me the opportunity, and we'll stay on top of this and check in as we get through the year.
All right. It's a special place, so thanks for being here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Paul Reed, my guest from Archaeology Southwest and Salmon Ruins here on KSJE. Back with more in just a moment, everybody. The time right now is coming up on 8:40.
KSJE is supported by the University of Denver Graduate School of Social Work Four Corners program. They're proud to offer a Master's of Social Work degree in the Four Corners community. Applications for the 2020-2022 cohort is now open. Classes are taught Fridays and Saturdays in Durango, Colorado. Find out more at 970-247-9773 or at du.edu/socialwork